open to hear something about assessment and scientific research, and it's a pleasure to me to welcome Bernhard Lerer, Professor of Psychiatry in Israel. And we are curious to hear also the new results.
Okay, thanks for organizing such a great meeting. You could have done better on the weather, but not everybody can be perfect. The meeting has really been excellent.
You know, at least people stay here and don't go sightseeing, so you know everything was planned.
So the truth is that you did.
As long as they got here.
Anyway, so I have 15 minutes, which I'm not going to waste on making jokes. I wanted to, so I'm going to try and just to give an overview of the whole development of the assessment portion of the portal over the course of 3 years. So that will be approximately 2 hours for each month. And I'll talk a little bit about the validation study. I'll just say, of course, that everybody contributed to all this work, and in particular, my two colleagues from Anima Dr. Semyon Kempsman, stand up for the know you, and Alex Sirota. Semyon is the expert on neuropsychology. Alex is the software engineer. And I'm this guy who happens to talk English well. So I get to make the presentations. So the whole purpose of this, from the beginning, there was a perception that we wanted to do 3 things. The first thing was online testing of learning ability and cognitive function. That was to, via the internet, to provide to users of the portal tests of dyslexia and tests of cognitive function, so as to identify areas of dysfunction which could serve as comorbidities and enable us to better understand the nature of the disability manifested by the person who's undergoing the tests. Now, of course, this is a huge amount of conceptualization, and we talked about it a great deal in the consortium, about how to do this, how to take tests, how to convert them to online tests, the user interface that had to be developed, which required a lot of workshops, and many, many other attendant issues which I'm not going to go into at present. And then the second issue was how to give the data back to the user. You're all aware, everyone here has had some kind of test sometime, somewhere, and you know that usually you sit with a neuropsychologist, sometimes he has a beer, sometimes not, and after that you presented with the results and he explains it to you. Here the concept is completely different, to provide the user with the results of the tests in real time. And at the time when we started 2 years ago, there was not one single website that did that. And to this day, there are virtually none that give a comprehensive assessment. But there were a lot of issues to consider, and we spent a lot of time in the consortium debating this. How do you present the results? You can't give a set of results in psychological jargon to an ordinary user of the portal. You can't say, your results are on particular areas of function are 20 percentiles below the norm, and what's going to happen to the person? How will he handle such a piece of information? So I recall this very clearly at a workshop in Tel Aviv. Eva came up with a solution of presenting people's strengths and weaknesses relative to themselves. And this was something that we elaborated and discussed, and this became the policy of the portal, to present people's outcomes as strengths and weaknesses relative to themselves. In what area are you strong and what area are you weak? And then the third concept that we developed was immediate or automatic referral to various tools available on the portal to improve function. These being cognitive training, brain training, which I may remind you didn't exist we negotiated with several other organizations which provide brain training for profit and not for profit. And then with the help of the group from Budapest, actually the homegrown brain training was developed, which is available on the portal. And what we set up as a group was the automatic link, the algorithm that took people from their results on the testing to the brain training that is appropriate for them. And I think it's really quite a remarkable series of programming activities and conceptualizations that went into all this. And I think sometimes we undersell ourselves in the internal debates that we have about things, and when we don't really take into account how much novelty there is on this portal, and how much is really new and does not exist anywhere else at all. So this, of course, is, you all know the portal. This is how it looks. You can test yourself. You can log in, and there's an opening questionnaire which was developed. The opening questionnaire addresses certain areas that are covered by the tests, but asking the person to assess themselves. And that's another piece of scientific data awaiting analysis, the correlation between the self-assessment and the actual assessment on the tests. And if the person completes the tests, then completes the questionnaire only, he gets a set of advices based on the questionnaire only. But of course the idea is that the user should go on to do the tests. And then essentially there are two core bodies of tests which are making up the test battery on the portal. The first is the so-called dyslexia tests or learning ability tests, which were the tests that Eva brought into the project and which Anima developed into online tests. So these were computerized tests which were in use in Budapest, and these tests were then developed into an online test program for online use with immediate results available, and they were adapted into the portal. And then the second body of tests is the CogScan battery. The CogScan is a proprietary battery developed by Anima, licensed to neuropsychologists and other users almost for the past 10 years, continually updated with a very rich database and data set behind it. And a subset of these tests was converted for online use on the portal and implemented on the portal. So, for example, and some of you here will recall how much time we spent in this very building just debating how to design the screen, and this is one of the tests where you have to match the shapes, but a lot of thought went into it, and how to do it in a way that a user who is not sitting in a room with a tester can actually understand what has to be done, particularly if the user has difficulties in the area of understanding written material. Of course, you can hear it, you can hear voice, he or she can hear voice instructions as well. So this was something that required a great deal of work. This is another one of the tests. This is one of the CogScan tests that was developed. And this is how the profile looks. This is how the cognitive profile looks. You all know this, or maybe some of you haven't been in and done it for a while, but essentially these are the results of the CogScan tests, and the user obtains a profile which says to him or her that his performance on, for example, on learning or on information processing is poorer relative to the other areas. But these are just words, so the person then has an explanation in written form of what this means, and then a referral to appropriate brain training and tips on the basis of these results. Now, I would be the last one to contend that all this is perfect. The brain training is very good in my opinion, but not rich. There's an enormous amount of work still to be done. And the tips are excellent, as you saw from Tsipi's presentation earlier, but they are few. There's really not a lot of them. So it's like a basis, a skeleton exists, but that skeleton can easily be fleshed out, just like the whole portal can easily be translated into another 10 languages. The infrastructure is there, and the infrastructure for moving people from doing the tests to the profiles, to the brain training, the tips, the helpful hints, etc. It's all there. You just need to fill it out and extend it. So we then went on and did a validation study. That was a big study, and I'm not going to go into all the data. There were several objectives to, first of all, establish the validity of the online versus the standalone batteries. Second of all, to establish that the batteries can distinguish individuals with dyslexia from individuals without dyslexia, to look at the validity of these batteries across the 3 languages, Hebrew, Czech and Hungarian, and then to regenerate on the basis of factor analysis the profiles that I showed you earlier, which were generated by factor analysis. For the validation study, we had volunteers in Budapest, in Brno, and in Jerusalem. The volunteers in Jerusalem were individuals without dyslexia, and their role was to do both tests, both the online and the standalone tests, and to allow us to determine if there was a correlation between the 2 sets of tests. And the groups in Brno and in Budapest, their role was for the purpose of determining whether we could distinguish individuals with dyslexia from individuals without dyslexia, to what extent, which tests are more sensitive, and also are there differences in the language, which yielded very interesting results. This is how it looked. I'm not going to go into that. Just a quick word about the results. First of all, the validity of the online versus the standalone batteries. This has never been done before. There's no published data on comparison of online versus standalone computerized cognitive batteries. Overall, we found good correlations, particularly for the digit running, match familiar figure tests, Stroop tests, and several others. And there were some other tests which did not show a good level of correlation, and you can see that they're particularly motor-related tests. For the dyslexia tests, the key findings were that there were several tests that clearly differentiated: reading speed, spelling, phonological ability, visual memory, sequential and parallel, and auditory memory. So these are the tests, the Budapest tests, which had been developed for online use on the portal, and people across both, these results are across both centers. These tests clearly distinguished between people with dyslexia and people without. This is a key issue. If we're doing tests, we want to be sure that the tests are sensitive online as they are in the standalone version. Sound discrimination, math ability, there were no significant differences, and reasoning is not a test where we expected to find differences, but it's an important negative. Now, the first paper, the first scientific paper that will kind of come out of this validation study is already complete, and it's now with all the co-authors who are going to provide us hopefully very soon with their comments, and then it will be submitted. This focused on the dyslexia tests and the analysis of the sensitivity to differentiate dyslexia and non-dyslexia in people with speaking Hungarian and Czech, and to evaluate the differences between the 2 centers and the 2 languages. And there were some really fascinating results. I'm not enough of an expert in the area of dyslexia to fluently describe all these results, but there are clearly language-related issues. And this work has never been done before. Most of the literature, to the best of my knowledge, on dyslexia is English-based. And there were some really very interesting findings. I'm not going to go through these because I'm not enough of an expert to do so, but Semyon is right here in the room, and I think if there are any questions afterwards, I think Semyon will address them. But I will say that these data are reported in the paper, and they show they are really fascinating. One thing that's very interesting is that one of the things that was noteworthy in the data was that there was a clear difference in motivation between the groups from Brno and Budapest. The Brno group were more highly motivated on the basis of their data to do the tests than were the group from Budapest. And obviously these differences were taken into account in the analysis of the data, but these are very important. They were related to the method of recruitment of the groups. And that's another point to take into account, because people doing internet-based tests are doing them at home, they're doing them or elsewhere on a park bench somewhere with a laptop, they're doing them unsupervised, and clearly these are important factors. And there's a lot of literature on internet-based scientific evaluation using volunteers, anonymous volunteers. In these cases, the volunteers were not anonymous. And there's a lot of support for the fact that internet-based evaluation has scientific validity, but clearly there are problems. And some of these problems came out in the data that we have here. All right, so I'm not going to go into the COG-scan tests, but the COG-scan tests as well showed some very interesting differences between the groups. So as far as publications are concerned, we have one paper that is already written and about to be submitted to the first journal it's going to go to, which is a rather high-impact journal focused on medical internet research, and of course it may start a journey until eventually it finds a home. The second paper is one that's being led by the Lerer group, and that talks about the whole process of developing these online, the interface of the online tests, and a draft of that is presently being looked at. And we're going to definitely have several other papers which will look at the COG-scan tests, which will look at the correlation between the online and the standalone tests, and there are several other interesting issues that will come up from this data set. So just to note again, who are the key contributors: the Anima group, whose work I've presented here, the group from Budapest led by Eva, the group from PPP led by Vera and Libor, and the University of Vienna group. These were the key contributors to the validation study, but obviously the whole consortium contributed to the development of the portal and the online tests within the portal, and we will certainly acknowledge the contribution of everybody in the acknowledgements of all the papers on which the people are not direct authors. Thank you for the questions. I'm happy to answer. Of course, as relates to the data, Semyon is here and he will answer.
Thank you. Any questions at this point?
I guess I'd be curious to know what the difference that you discovered between the motivation between the different teams turned out to be. Was that something that you were able to put your finger on, or not really?
Yeah, the people in Budapest were less motivated.
But why?
Semyon, can you just elaborate on that?
This conclusion we can to take from 2 points. First of all, we show differences in groups, half standard deviation between 2 groups, better in Czech Republic. Second, we can to make filtering regarding unreliable results. Before, we have more unreliable results in group of Hungarian people. We can conclude two factors. We can to see not in understanding of our remarks. The filtering we can take, we see result, the real-time results. We can see documentation of each point of performance in each time. We can see the breaking performance when
Boring.
The user becomes bored.
Boring for participants. If a participant have not motivation to continue to performance, we can conclude this breaking of performance is a result for underperformance of participants.
And Bracha, we will try to interpret it together in our group because we were discussing with Simeon, and maybe tomorrow we will find time for it, or on Wednesday.
It would be very interesting to see, maybe they were compensated in a different way, maybe they had higher level of...
Eva as well, and then it could
Yeah.
be compared, and then we can develop a strategy how to do it in
Future.
Yes,
That's right.
but we have these differences as adjusted factors.
Right, for your results. Yeah.
Analyzation.
Okay, great, thank you.
I just wanted to make one point. Professor Harrison's talk was of particular interest to me because the areas that he focused on, half of what he discussed is not reflected in these tests at all. We're only able to identify with these tests people who have the core disabilities, but the type of people that you described that are, we'd call them high functioning, or people with dyslexia, we're not identifying. We don't have the tools, and that's a whole big challenge. If the project were continuing another 2 or 3 years, that's something that I think it would be very, very challenging to try and address because it's not there at all in the tests as we have them now.